So we'll call the meeting to order. Are we
6:35.
So the first order of business is meeting minutes extension request pursuant to Rhode Island General Law 4246(7)(b)(1), the September 9th regular meeting minutes. I'll take a motion.
I make a motion that we extend the request for the minutes extended to the next meeting. Would be October 14th.
The next meeting is October 14th, not speak for the completed by that time, but you can continue them to that date, and if they're not completed, you can continue them again.
Does second the motion? All in favor? Aye. So the next order of business is old business. Preliminary plan, public hearing, Perry Hills Conservation Subdivision, Principal Development Corporation, 118 Main Street, Providence, Rhode Island. The applicant owner for a 6-lot minor subdivision with a private right of way located at 0 Punchbowl Trail, Plat 5 East, Lot 5.1. For 5 of the proposed lot will support single-family homes, while 1 of the proposed lots will be set aside as open space for the proposed. Okay, so
So the applicant is here, we
Okay.
have Steve Cabral online, we have Mr. Bob Ferrari in the back over there. Since we last met, I received comments from Mr. Ferrari. I found that the A&J Well Company had provided their responses for the peer review that had been conducted by Crossman to Mr. Ferrari, and also an updated table 2, but they were not sent to Crossman Engineering. So I sent them to Crossman Engineering. To date, I don't know if they've had an opportunity to review those materials. So ultimately, I think that it's imperative that the board feels that you have all the necessary information to make an informed decision. So as I previously mentioned, we have Steve Cabral here, we have Mr. Ferrari here, we have the applicant here. Any questions that you might have about any of the testing that's been conducted, any of the review work that's been done, either by the peer reviewer or by Northeast Water Solutions, it's totally up to you to engage in those kinds of conversations about what it is that you're, or any questions that you have.
okay,
So, right now, public hearing has been continued to today, and the date for the decision has been extended to October 14th. So, just to give you kind of a lay of the land in that regard. So,
okay. Does the applicant have anything you'd like to share to start?
Good evening, Kelly Perkatson for the applicant. I don't think I have anything else to share or submit.
Okay. So maybe have the engineers speak to what they've provided. Maybe go through whether it's Crossman, maybe to run.
who would you like to hear from first? You could hear from Crossman Engineering first, or you could hear from Mr. Ferrari.
Does anyone have a preferred Crossman? Either.
Ask a procedural question.
Sure.
Because I'm getting too familiar. So as you call the agenda item, are you assuming the hearing is automatically be opening? You don't have to actually make a motion to.
No, because the hearing is open. It's just open, you don't close it and then reopen it. It's just open for once you open it, and then once you close it, and that's it.
So we're, in the past, we used to make a motion for the record that the hearing was continued.
Yeah, the hearing was continued, it stayed open, it remains open, so motion's not necessary. Appreciate the question.
Okay. Just getting up the procedure.
Of course, yeah, please feel free, anyone at any time, if you have any procedural questions, please.
So let's start with Crossman.
Sure.
Go through their review. Helpful.
Steve, I'm asking you to unmute.
Oh, good evening. I'm Steve Cabral with Crossman Engineering. And yes, can you all hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay,
see.
good.
It'd be great if you can run through your summary notes that you provided, give us a high level of your thoughts.
Oh, okay. I would like to add, I did receive a copy of Mr. Ferrari's memo on Friday afternoon. And I do have a handful of comments on that, but I still have not received a copy of the A&J well drilling comments or responses to my initial letter. So I can assure you that if we can receive PDFs by tomorrow, we'll respond, I'd say by Monday, we'll give you a final report on our opinion on the applicant's response as well as Mr. Ferrari's. Now, some of the comments that I'll have on Bob's report, Bob Ferrari, if Bob makes a presentation tonight, really pertain to the fact that my impression is Bob really looked at the overall watershed as opposed to the site-specific recharge of this 11.5 acre parcel. And if we wanted to get into the details, I'll be glad to, but I do have a big disagreement with Bob on some of the assumptions made. But in the end, what it comes down to is both Bob and I seem to agree that there should be additional well testing to document whether or not there's going to be an impact on the abutters. That's really the key point. So I don't like to spend time commenting on technical items that really don't have major relevance. Now, one thing I'll be glad to go through is my comments were focused on one thing, and that is our role was to identify whether or not the applicant's submission addressed all of the well testing requirements that are required by Chapter 18.21, the Aquifer Overlay District. So that's why our memo was rather brief. I highlighted six items that are clearly identified and required by the ordinance that I didn't believe were fully addressed. And at the previous meeting, we did hit on those. I'll be glad to read through them again if you would like. But then again, I'm on a commission, so I know I don't always like to have discussions that are a repetition. But I'll be glad to go through them if you prefer.
What does the board feel about that?
I would like to hear where you differ with Mr. Ferrara.
Oh, sure. I can, if Bob doesn't mind me calling him Bob. I've known Bob for years.
Sure.
And I've reviewed many of Bob's reports, and usually what it comes down to, and I think Bob will agree, that when we first compare reports, we don't always agree, but within a week or two, we come to an agreement. And the key items are always pretty much agreed upon. But if you have a copy of Bob's report in front of you, one of the first things that jump out, say, would be on page 2. Bob provides a summary of the projected water demands. And he has a table, total bedrooms, 5 units, 5 homes with 4 bedrooms each comes to 20 beds. The unit water demand is 115 gallons per day, and that's 115 gallons per day per bedroom. And that's taken from the DEM on-site wastewater treatment system, the septic system regulations. I certainly agree with that. So when you multiply 20 beds times 115, you come to 2,300 gallons per day. That's the maximum daily water usage, assuming there's absolutely no irrigation utilized. And then Bob has an OWTS recharge factor of 85%. Now, that's one item that later on you'll understand, you'll hear why I disagree with taking credit for that. And the reason is, I do agree that about 85% of the flow will go to the septic system. And of course, any water going into the septic system is going to infiltrate into the soil. The key item here is we're discussing the impact of bedrock wells. Now, just because you have seepage, water, effluent getting into the upper groundwater level, only a very small percentage is actually going to make its way into the bedrock fissures. So I don't believe it's appropriate to take 85% recharge credit for the bedrock well. You know, there are different studies that show that the amount of groundwater that infiltrates into the bedrock could be anywhere from 9 to 10 to 15%. So that's a much lower value than the 85%. Now, if we go to the next page, table 1, if we look at table 1, I'll just point out one thing. Let's see. The table, mathematically, the tables are fine. But the key item to recognize is that when there's say there's the 24-hour average demand flow rate of 0.38 gallons per minute. Now that table implies that the average demand flow rate is extremely low, only 0.38 gallons per minute. Now that is a valid number for a bedroom, but there's a big assumption. That assumption is that you have your maximum day demand, and that demand is spread out evenly over 24 hours. And of course, we all know that half of the time, nobody's using water at a house, and it's only during short spells that there's a peak. So I just wanted to point that out, not that it's an error by any means, but for someone who's not familiar reading these tables, it looks like, oh, the demand is extremely low. So I just want to point that out. Okay, also on page 3, Bob, as usual, does a very thorough job analyzing a watershed and analyzing the effective annual recharge rate. And the way Bob does that, it's certainly a valid method. You know, he'll look at the meter data of a river, and he'll look at the average annual rainfall, and he'll be able to compute what the net recharge is by looking at the volume of water flowing in the river versus the volume of rainfall. And then he applies that recharge rate to the site. Now, our site is about 11 acres. If you look at the river that was studied, forgive me, I may mispronounce it, Uskapog. Now, the Uskapog River has a watershed of about 23,000 acres, and it has a low-lying stratified drift, which is a great aquifer, surface aquifer, of about 7,900 acres. Now, based upon that watershed area and that very large stratified drift area, which is a great sponge, it's a great area to hold groundwater. I do agree that the average effective recharge rate is about 25.4 inches per year. And then Bob applies that to the site, the 11.21 acre site. Now, this is where I disagree with that method. And the reason is our site has no stratified drift. Our site is a hillside comprised of till. So we're not going to get that type of recharge on this site. I do agree, on average, over the 23,000 acres, you will. Now, why is that important to me? It's important to me because our focus is really on identifying, is there a potential impact on the abutter's well? And is there enough water to service the site? I do agree with Bob, if we looked at the 23,000 acre watershed as a whole, this site is really minimal. But again, the way the aquifer ordinance is written, we need to be confident that we're not going to impact a direct abutter or the future homeowners. Now, if we go to there's 3 lines at the bottom of page 3. There's the gross total average daily demand groundwater extraction. Without nitpicking numbers, we'll go with that 1,804 gallons per day. And then there's a subtraction of the groundwater recharge due to the septic system of 1,533 gallons per day. So the implication is that all this project is doing is pulling 271 gallons per day out of the ground. This is one area where I disagree completely with. And the reason is, as I previously stated, I do not believe, and I could certainly provide justification for this belief, that 1,533 gallons per day is not going from the leach fields into the bedrock. So I believe in order to provide a conservative analysis, we really should assume no more than 10% at most, unless Bob can provide some good data, that septic system infiltration is actually getting into the bedrock wells. Now, otherwise, the following pages, let's see, Bob gets deep into the well data, and I'm not disagreeing with what Bob is indicating. I would just like to see, the applicant respond to the comments that I had, which were rather straightforward, so that the board has a good record of justification from the applicant. Because I'm acting as the peer reviewer for the town planning board, and I understand that Bob Ferrari is acting as like a department for the town because he helps oversee the town's water department. So for the record, I don't believe that Mr. Ferrari's report should be justification for approving the wells. I believe the justification needs to be from the applicant's engineer, and then I will give you a very quick response as soon as I see their response to my comments. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I think it makes sense to have Ferrari share his thoughts, if you will.
Good evening. Good evening. Bob Ferrari, President of Northeast Water Solutions, Chief Professional Engineer. December 31st, I'll have 49 years of experience.
Could you speak up a little bit, Bob?
Sure, sorry,
Thank
sorry,
you.
Talia.
No, don't worry about it. I just hear people in the audience going,
Hey. My firm operates the Richmond public water system, among other things. And appeared before this planning board previously to that on behalf of applicants. In the past, but I am nominally recused since we executed this contract with the town of Richmond. And the genesis of what I was doing is that since last winter, I've been contacted, I'm not sure how many times, by a wide range of people, residents in the community, developer or their council, questions, with questions and concerns. So I finally said, why don't I take a look at this? I have no involvement with it, with this development project, other than the fact that I'm aware of it, and I happen to know, with the exception of that legal counsel, I do know their design team because we all work together. I was actually surprised, and by the way, Steve and I have known each other from I don't know how long, decades. I'm not sure. And
Yes.
we don't always agree, but he calls me Bob and I call him Steve. We get along just fine. So
Yes.
And we actually agree on a lot of stuff. Having said all that, I am familiar with the town's ordinance. I think actually the genesis of the ordinance was protocols that I've developed and used for about 25 years, particularly on residential wells. In any event, I was contacted by both several of the well services companies that were contacted by the developer to say, can you help us out? What's going on in Richmond? Explain this to us, what they need. I went through the ordinance with them and said, here's what you need to do. Here's the basics. And, you know, do what you do best. I did receive Steve's comments, and actually, Steve does a lot of peer review work. If you folks don't know it, he tends to be extremely thorough. Covers a lot of ground. And by the way, if the planning board said, can we hire Bob Ferrari to do peer review? I'd say, well, if you want me to peer review something about hydrology or wells, sure, but anything else, hire Steve. Okay. He's a broadly experienced civil engineer. I know I've been rambling a bit here. Okay, some things here. The methodologies I use, and again, if I was working for the developer, this 7 or so page memo report would be probably about a 50-page report. Okay, so there'd be a lot more in here, a lot more detail. Just to respond to a couple of things Steve said, and it's not that either one of us is wrong here. We look at the sites within a watershed. We look at the watershed. In this case here, we looked at the specific site soils. And as far as site recharge for the natural water balance for the site, we provided a range. And that range was based upon the range for the Uskapog Queens watershed study that was done. By the way, the study was done probably about 25 or 30 years ago. It's an excellent study, and the database actually was a gauging station in very close proximity to this project site in Uskapog, Rhode Island. So keep that in mind. So the data actually is believed to be very accurate, and it's been used widely by state and federal agencies as well as people like me. As far as we laid out, when you start one of these evaluations, you lay out what's our water demand on the site, how much water this well is going to extract in total and individually. Okay, this site proposed 5 houses on a roughly 11-acre site, slightly more than 11 acres, 4 bedrooms, standard criteria. And you extract the wells would extract out presumably the full amount, and a significant percentage gets recharged into the ground, into the overburden soils through the septic systems. That 85% recharge factor, what I can tell you is that was not an invention by me. That's a value that has been developed based on studies in Rhode Island, is accepted by DEM. In fact, they use that all the time, is accepted by Department of Health and other regulatory bodies. The soils, while they're not stratified drift, they're glacial meltout till, and they have Canton and Charlton soils. They actually have a reasonably moderate to moderately high recharge on transmissivity and permeability. No, they're not stratified drift, but again, in our evaluation, when I did, we said, here's the average value, but here's the range from max to a min as far as on-site recharge. We use that value to say, look at the total gross extraction from the site. Is there a reasonable expectation that that water is going to be sufficient recharge on the site, that we're not going to have an excessive extraction percentage? Okay. And Steve is correct that your extraction from bedrock is going to be, bedrock does not recharge at the same rate that the overburden soils do for the obvious reason. It's fairly solid. Bedrock, particularly in New England, is recharged from above. Soils, you get precipitation or other overland flow. Soils percolate through the ground, through the soils, and a certain fraction of that recharges into the bedrock. Studies have been done, by the way, and the recharge is typically from a minimum of about 3 inches per year to a maximum of about 14 or 15, depending on the nature of the bedrock. We never use the maximum values. We tend to use probably 7 to 9 inches a year. Okay, it is correct that the studies I looked at, they use, as far as the average for the entire watershed was 25.4 inches with a range of 12.5 to 36.2. That's your range, inches per year of precipitation recharge into the ground. But again, if you look at the bedrock recharge range, it's assuming a relative uniformity of the bedrock, which does not exist. Okay. And if you want any proof of that, you can look at the performance of 2 wells that were drilled on this site. Okay, in very close proximity. As far as the on page 3, table 1, we lay out the 24-hour average demand. We don't actually use it. It's of minimal or no value. The demand values that are actually important would be, say, your peak 1-hour demand and your peak instantaneous demand. That's what you have to deal with in a house, and that's what the well needs to be able to support. The well, the pressure bladder tank, etc. Okay. If you look at other projects that my firm has submitted for residential development projects, you'll see how that translates to a given water supply well. Ultimately, looking at the pumping tests, both wells, relative to the very generic criteria established for residential wells by DEM, the wells theoretically meet the minimum requirement as far as gallons per minute versus depth of well. You do have to be careful using those values because, again, not all wells are created equal. Okay, in fact, I'll make a statement and everybody in this room should listen to it and believe it. Every bedrock well is unique. I guarantee you there are no 2 bedrock wells that will have exactly the same fracture orientation and capacity. Even if you think they do, they don't. And again, the proof is these 2 wells that are about 30 feet apart, okay, in the same bedrock formation. In any event, to make a very long story short, the wells did pump in both cases, certainly over their 8-hour duration, more than 2,000 gallons. The dilemma became that they had a very extended recharge duration. Okay. That means that was the generic term we use is that it actually had almost like a negative recharge. Okay, if you pump for 8 hours, you want your well to recharge in equal or less time than your pumping duration. So if you pump for 8 hours, you want to achieve your, say, 95% recharge, 95% or better in 8 hours. It didn't occur with these wells. And that is a very clear indication that the wells were getting overstressed by the pumping rate. It doesn't mean that the driller or the well services can be did anything wrong. You know, they actually, both wells, again, in the world of bedrock wells, you gotta be very careful, hit a reasonable approximation of stability, drawdown stability. It wasn't perfect. Very few bedrock wells are perfect. But that resulted in a series of recommendations, okay, that I made here. And this is where I think Steve and I will very substantially agree. So as Steve said before, we kind of took different roads, but we more or less come to the same place, okay? One recommendation in here was, and actually it's in the body of the text, I somehow didn't get it, the final recommendation section, was that, and I actually did call the engineering firm for the developer, American Engineering, and I talked to Patrick Freeman. I said, Patrick, you guys planning any irrigation here? Because if you are, it's not a good idea. And he said, no, they're not. And I said, all right, good. I said, because I'm going to recommend that you don't have a formal irrigation system. Okay. What's an irrigation system? A more formal system, and everybody's probably familiar with it. Well, a lot of people, you have your nice lawn in front of your house, and you have the sprinklers, and they go on in the irrigation season. Every other day or every third day, they're on, 6 o'clock in the morning for some duration of time, and they might sequence around or whatever. I'm recommending do not do that, okay, because that's a good way to overstress wells. Just to put this in perspective, if someone's got a couple of tomato plants on their back deck, okay, or a small flower garden, and they're going to need, 5 gallons or 10 or 20 or gallon, that's not a big deal. But a formalized irrigation system, you will overstress the aquifer. Okay, at least with these two wells, right? The other recommendations we made was that although they meet the theoretical DEM criteria, we said you have to moderate the flow rate of these wells. Okay, the single biggest mistake, and I've had this conversation with residential and commercial well owners, I don't know how many thousand times in my career, is that one of the worst things you can do relative to a small well, a bedrock well, is you put a pump in that well, or you pump the well at a rate greater than its effective recharge rate. When you do that, you get excessive drawdown. And when you draw a well down too far, when you expose the fractures in the well, you lose capacity because you're going from what they call laminar flow to turbulent flow. And that's what happened in one of the wells. The well that had been kind of clocking along for about 7.5 hours suddenly dropped off. And I've actually do that sometimes in pumping tests. We'll purposely do that to evaluate that. I am very, very confident that what happened is there was a fracture right about 70 feet down that got daylighted. I mean, the well doesn't have huge capacity to begin with. So when you lost maybe 50% of that fracture's capacity due to turbulence, it dropped, it had a very rapid drawdown decline. And then when they turned the pump off, it came back up pretty quickly, at least back to that level. That's a strong indication that you do water, they call it the watering of fracture. So you got to moderate. We even provided in here recommended flow rates. And I would also further recommend that you've got to match your pressure bladder tank to your flow rate. So a lot of houses, if you're on a well and you go to your basement, you look at your pressure bladder tank, it's probably a relatively small tank. Maybe it's like 12 or 15 inches in diameter, and maybe it's like, 30 inches high. You might need a larger pressure tank. Because if someone's taking a shower and someone decides to wash the dishes at the same time, okay, you want to make sure you have enough storage volume in the house so you don't, your well doesn't go on right away and you don't overtax your well. That's how you do it. So that was a recommendation. I am strongly recommending that, and again, I think A&J Well did overall a fairly good job here. Okay, Scott knows what he's doing, Scott Wright. But this issue of hydraulic connectivity and potential connectivity to neighboring wells, that's always a big concern. Okay, and having spoken to one or more of the nearby residents, they have concerns, and I understand the concerns. You saw connectivity. If you looked at the pumping test data, you saw that the 2 wells on the site have connectivity. And the issue is, how much connectivity is there if there's a well 500 feet away or a well 1,000 feet away, etc. The good news here is that water-bearing bedrock fractures tend to be two-way streets, So what I've recommended here is that you do about a 1-week monitoring program, put a transducer back in each of those 2 wells, okay, with barometric pressure compensation on it. If you don't do that, the data is useless. And watch them for a week. The wells on the site will not be getting pumped. They're just going to be static wells. And we'll see if they are being affected by pumping of neighboring wells. That's the 2-way street. These wells could affect neighboring wells. Neighboring wells could potentially have an effect on these wells, okay, as far as indicating if there's connectivity. So that's how you can do it. I recommended 1 week on that, okay, and then, take a look at that data. Treatment, any reasonable review of the, water analysis. Clearly, iron and manganese treatment is necessary. There's a number of treatment processes. That's a function of the bedrock geochemistry, okay? And by the way, welcome to Rhode Island. Probably 40–50% of the rural areas of Rhode Island, if you sink a well, you're gonna have iron and or manganese in your water, okay? The only question is how much. So clearly, treatment is necessary. I don't believe they need corrosion control treatment. Steve was right, by the way, the alkalinity is, I would call it moderately low, okay? It's not real, I mean, if you want to see low, take a sample from the wells at Charlestown Elementary School. The alkalinity there is like 10. There's actually a site up on West Gloucester. The alkalinity is 4. Okay? So that's really low. But the good news here is that chloride and sulfate were actually lower, a lot lower. And the relationship with alkalinity to chloride and sulfate is one of the principal drivers of corrosion. There's all kinds of corrosion and scale indices. We blow our brains out going through them. But that relationship, which is pretty much evaluated with what they call a Larson-Skold index, indicated there was a slight corrosion potential. That could then translate to the plumbing materials used by the developer. Okay. And it's more of a plumbing question at that point, but there's not we don't have a severe corrosion potential here. So I made some of these recommendations. I thought Steve made some really good points that needed to be elaborated on. And so to some degree, I elaborated on them, reinforcing some of the points and we'll clarifying some of them.
So Ferrara, I have a couple of questions for Harvey. One is, in the recharge, does the slope affect the recharge rate?
It can, okay. And this, which is why it's important to take note of, say, the maximum minimum range on that recharge. This is a relatively, particularly the upland end of the site, which is proposed for open space, I believe. It's pretty steeply pitched, and it's pretty steep pitch across the site, which means the drainage is going east southeast. Not exactly a surprise. And now they did do they did a lot of test pits, which give an indication of the soil types. In a lot of those test pits, they did not necessarily hit groundwater, although they saw indication of the high groundwater table. I'm not a soil evaluator, but I know some really good ones, and they used a good soil evaluator. So
In the same light, the septic systems, my recollection, are actually down gradient from the wells. So that recharge of like 85%, is that going to be reduced by virtue of the location of the septic site?
we're not, I want to stress this, we're not suggesting that the septic system is recharging the well. What we're looking at this site in total, okay, and saying we're extracting water from the ground. A certain amount of it's going back into the ground. How does that relate to an overall site water balance? Okay, I think we would all agree. Now, by the way, when and Steve can actually address this probably better than I can. When water goes through a septic system, I mean, there's some level of treatment per se, but ultimately it's being treated, in the bed and in the ground. Okay, we don't want to put sewage in close proximity to the well, period. So actually, I happen to like the fact that the septic systems are hydrologically down gradient and just to carry it away from the well. But remember, we have drainage coming from upgrade. And again, there's going to be variability. We have wet periods, we have droughts, and everything in between. So it's a very variable situation, which is why it's important that we're dealing with bedrock rock wells, which are they're indirectly recharged. Okay? And every well is different. And that's why it's important when you're using bedrock wells that you have to, under the theoretical evaluation here, you only want to be using a very small percentage of the theoretical site recharge. And I have been the skunk at the garden party who has been had to tell more than a few developers, sorry, but your your extraction is like 25 or 30% of your theoretical recharge. That isn't going to fly. Okay, that's not going to work. But when you're in a situation where you're 1 or 2 or 3 or 5% or even 10%, using the gross theoretical evaluation, that you're in a relatively safe zone, as long as each individual well demonstrates it's got sufficient net effective recharge, that it can meet the basic requirements of the house. Okay, the individual house inside too. Okay. There's a whole bunch of interrelated factors here that you have to take into account.
Obviously, as Steve Cabral had mentioned, that one of the big concerns here has been the impact on the connectivity to other wells.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
unfortunately, we have histories from the testimonies of folks living in the area, that they have had historical problems with their wells. And, will this intensify that problem?
And that's a legitimate question to be asked, and I would never suggest that it's not. Okay. By the way, until recently, I lived in a rural area and had a 450-foot deep well, by the way, which, I told the drill, you keep drilling, I want more. But having said that, it's a very legitimate question, and that's why I'm suggesting that we put transducers back in those wells. It's not an onerous task. I mean, you can put a transducer in a well in about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, effort. Okay, it takes longer to drive to the site than to put the transducer in the well, because it will give very valuable data. And I would recommend a week, because in the course of a week, people are going to be, people in the neighboring residences, they're going to be using their wells, and 1 day's worth of data is not enough. Okay, and again, it's not a criticism of the test that was done. They did their best to conform to the terms and conditions of the ordinance. By the way, for what it's worth, I would be more than happy to offer a few tweaks to the ordinance if the town is willing to consider them. Okay, could make some enhancements to it. But no, it's a legit concern. I think it should be addressed. If I'm the developer, if I was advising a developer, I'd say, you really want to do this because you want to be a good neighbor. And we want to make sure we haven't got an issue. Okay.
Does it matter if it's a wet season, dry season?
I would, obviously you've got to take precipitation into account. Okay. You really don't want to do it in the middle of the wet season.
Agricultural drought right now.
Yeah.
The drought
Yeah.
committee is meeting next month, and they might put us in the first phase of drought for the state.
Yeah, this wouldn't be a bad time to do it. Okay. Now, I don't know, I think it was 2024. We had 44 inches of rain between December and May. Not a good time.
Yeah.
Any pump test was going to look good.
Any other questions?
I have a couple. So their design is based on a 4-bedroom unit house. And it sounds like to me, based on your report and your description, Steve Cabral's description, that sizing the well pump and the well storage inside the house is critical. What about reducing the house to 3 bedrooms? Would that alter the amount of water that might be consumed and give a little buffer safety to the recharge of the development?
Well,
And less
obviously,
people in the house using less water.
the theoretical water demands are based upon a certain daily volume per bedroom.
Yeah, so if
Okay,
you're.
so obviously,
Or you're building 3
right.
bedrooms.
That's true, but keep this in mind. That's assuming 2-person per bedroom occupancy. Okay, so a 4-bedroom house has maximum 8 people occupancy. So, but that 4-bedroom house might only have, I don't know, 4 people in it or 5 people in it, whatever. I don't know what we do all these things based upon 100% build out and occupancy. Okay, so that's why I used, and Steve would have done the same thing. 20 bedrooms, 5 houses, 4 bedrooms apiece. That's 20 bedrooms. That's 40 people. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, if you have lower occupancy in a given residence, theoretically, you have lower water use. Okay. I'm not gonna stand in front of you and say, oh, I think these should be 3-bedroom houses or not. That's the call of the developer.
My question was, is if you reduce the number of bedrooms, you're reducing water use overall, and it might give a buffer to the recharge, because you're not taking that much more water out.
With the caveat that you've got to look at the actual occupancy of the house.
Correct. I've seen 2-bedroom houses have 12 people. I've seen 4-bedroom
Yeah.
houses have 2 people, so. The other question I had was related to the potability issue and the radon testing. It doesn't look like that has been completed yet. The results were still pending. You said that on page 8 of your report.
My understanding is it is. I haven't seen it, so I assume it's still pending. Now, what I will say is, the water samples that would have been sent out for, say, the radionuclide analysis, they're probably going to a laboratory in Colorado, and turnaround time can be very extended. Because there's only a handful of laboratories in the country that do the analysis. There's no local laboratory, as far as I know, that does it. So it's got to be sent out. So to my knowledge, I mean, I haven't seen it, so I can't answer the question. But I haven't seen it.
And my recollection when we were here in August was that I left here with the thought that well number 2 was going to be retested, repumped, pumping was going to be redone. Did that happen, or is this for your professional review of that and the materials? Did you stepping in take place of that repumping of well number 2?
I evaluated the original pumping test data. Okay, I'm not aware that that either well has undergone a retest of any sort. Okay, in reviewing the pumping test data, I feel, based upon my experience, I've actually driven wells to do exactly what that showed, because I wanted to see what would happen in a given well. So based on my experience, I think I evaluate that test data. I looked at it very carefully, and said, I think this is my interpretation of what that was. So I'm not necessarily advocating they have to go back and redo the pumping test there. What I am strongly recommending is that, based upon the pumping tests, I've made recommendations to moderate the pumping rate in both those wells. Okay, and also recommending, you have to probably use a larger pressure bladder tank with the moderated pumping rate as well.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the connectivity test that you're proposing. So would it matter, I know you're talking about down gradient, does that, because we don't obviously know in which direction the bedrock sucks, like the water comes from, you said it's a 2-way street, is it always a 2-way street, or is it?
There can be circumstances where it's not. Just for what it's worth, I'm gonna try to not get too far into the weeds. The general pitch of the bedrock in this area is reasonably consistent with the overall topography. The bedrock, what they call the foliation of the bedrock, those are like, it's like if you took a section through the bedrock, it looks like the pages of a book. Okay, it tends to dip southeast, which is
Just the same as
which is not unexpected here. Okay, it's consistent with what we'd expect to see. You got some foliation and fractures they call striking northeast and dipping southeast. Having said all that, fractures don't always follow the foliation. Okay, and that's why every well is unique. And so you could have a situation where, even though the bedrock, and you'd expect groundwater flow to maybe go to the southeast, remember, it's the overall recharge gradient is coming from probably west to east or from, say, northwest to southeast across this, not just this site, but the area in
Right.
general. Okay, so I would particularly, if there's going to be connectivity, I'd expect it to see it to the northwest and south. Okay, most that'd be my most predominantly. It's not that it can't be. You can't have connectivity because again, fractures don't always follow the foliation.
So it could potentially affect different abutters differently.
Yeah,
And
good.
it would be difficult to assess that with 100% confidence.
Well, I think the best way to assess it is, as I said, to put transducers in the wells and just let them sit there and they'll data log, see what the data shows. Again, because presumably the neighbors are going to continue to use their wells.
Right.
Okay, and they're going to use them in a normal fashion as they would on a day-to-day basis. So that gives us a good indication then. Hopefully that'll give us a good indication if there's hydraulic connectivity. That's really the best way to do it, is to use transducers over a period of time.
Thank you. Dan, any questions?
Sure. Based on what you have learned and what you have shared with us, if you lived there, given a choice, would you rather live on house 5 or house 1?
From a water supply standpoint, I'd rather live in house 1. That's the one at the bottom.
Bottom?
Drainage is coming down. Okay, now you gotta be careful. If you're talking about water supply well, I think your best opportunity is at the bottom of the hill. Okay, if you're talking getting your basement flooded, your worst opportunity is probably the bottom of the hill. So be careful what you wish for.
Thank you.
So at this point, unless there's other questions from the board, we could,
Get Steve to kind of
okay,
see what he thinks about it.
sure, before we move to the public. Steve, any other additional thoughts here about?
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Any other additional comments in response to Bob's?
No, like both Bob and I said, there are certain issues that we don't necessarily agree on, but when it comes to the key points, the well and the impact to the abutters, we both agree that the best thing is to do additional testing. And we hope that the abutters are willing to work with the applicant, because really it's in their benefit to participate.
Okay,
Can I ask the attorney?
sure.
I don't know if the developer's here. No.
Yes.
Are they willing to do further testing?
Absolutely.
The 7-day monitoring of the ambience? No.
A continuous 7-day monitoring program. using
Yeah.
Standard pressure.
With the
transducers.
transducers?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's almost necessary at this time.
Yeah.
It sounds like it.
To assure that they are meeting the requirements of our ordinance. The notes that I had from the last discussion last month was addressing adequate capacity, testing for components for portability, which Mr. Ferrari has addressed with his comments, and then more testing required for addressing ordinance requirements, specifically issue of the well number 2 left here, thinking there was going to be some more pumping done on that well.
Okay. At this point, if you're from the public, that makes
Yes.
sense.
And just to reiterate, if there are questions from the public for either of the parties here, either Steve Cabral and Mr. Ferrari, you ask for them through the chair, and then the chair can entertain those questions. So that's just how the process specifically works. But if you do have questions, please come up and state your name for the record.
Joyce Flanagan, Punch Bowl Trail, Richmond. I don't have specific questions.
Or comments, either.
Yeah, I do have comments. I'm supposed to say it's so technical and these people have so much expertise. My head went to these discussions in terms of how will this all be monitored in the future? And now I'm gonna pull in some of the things that these two men mentioned. Will the planning board be the board that monitors future requests from these homeowners when they want to add, for example, a bedroom? Now, I realize that would also mean that they'd have to have a new septic system if they only have 4-bedroom septic systems, but 10 years from now, as the technology continues to improve, there will be better septic systems, and that might be something that one of these homeowners would be interested in. So now you've got maybe 5 bedrooms instead of 4. And in line with monitoring that, what about a future homeowner who decides to add an irrigation system? And nobody's reading the HOA rules anymore. They've kind of sold their house a couple of times. They've forgotten what they say. Planning board has turned over. Building inspector has retired, and there's 2 replacements since then. How will all this information be retained and available in the future for enforcement purposes? And then I thought about a homeowner who has a faulty pressure tank, a very common occurrence in new construction. And that homeowner calls their plumber who says, you don't need that big pressure tank, you just need a little one. So the homeowner buys the little one to save money. We can't monitor that. And I'm going to skip the other things. I'm just more concerned about enforcement, tracking, the future, and bringing it all back to water, which is the most important thing that all of us depend on in our daily lives. And then I do have a question for the planning board. I'm not sure you can answer it. I was confused because Mr. Ferrari mentioned that if he had done this report for the developer, it would be longer. It would be 50 pages. So is he not working for the developer? Who's he working for? I got really confused on that one.
He works for the town.
Oh, so he was here. So we have a peer reviewer
Yes,
and we have Mr. Ferrari who came here for the town.
they both work for the town.
Thank you
Yes.
very much. Thank you. So if the planning board could just think about those concerns that I mentioned.
In regards to the enforcement, thoughts on any of those points or?
When it comes to certain kinds of enforcement actions, it would really depend on the document in which they're enforced. So for example, if you were to make a decision and one of the conditions of approval was that there weren't any irrigation systems involved, that would be ultimately enforceable by whoever is the planner at the time, whether it's me, whether it's someone else. When it comes to agreements between like people who buy and sell the property, that is civil more, you know, if someone does not, we can review HOA documents. We can say this looks good or this makes sense, but ultimately we are not enforcing those civil kinds of disagreements that take place between people. And Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I would class it, say it this way. HOA violations are between, those are homeowners issues between the homeowners and the association. So that's between the associations to enforce or not, that's their business. The town's not involved. It's a violation of the housing code. So ordinance, their actual. That's an enforcement that the town undertakes. The town doesn't go looking for it though, however. It's not as if the town's gonna go there once a year and inspect, right? That would come from a complaint, it would be the building inspector would investigation and then with action.
And just to kind of dovetail with that, in relation to the question about like, if there's a faulty pressure tank, and one is replaced, the person who's doing the inspection may not know that there was a specific tank that was put forth as part of an approval. So it would be certainly an education process that you have to go through with, in regards to any changes that might happen on that site from that perspective.
So I agree with you. All of those points that were included, the restrictions. I would hope would be included in the HOA documents, right?
The problem with that, HOA documents can expire.
Okay.
And a lot of times, a lot of neighborhoods want them to expire. And more importantly, I think, is deed restrictions that will convey with the lane or with the property. I don't know what this looks like.
If a restriction is part of the approval, that restriction, and it becomes part of the chain of title.
Okay,
Sure, so it works that way. It doesn't have to be necessarily.
good point.
And also to clarify, if anything happens in the future that needs enforcement, it is the town staff that does the enforcement. It is not the planning board. We do not have enforcement abilities. We have approval ability of enabling by the state. We wouldn't investigate violations.
Nancy wouldn't be going to your house and going, you have an irrigation
Right.
system here.
Yeah.
That would be me. Or whoever is, sitting seat whenever that happens, whenever, at some point in the future. But we also are not, I'm not driving around town looking to see who's violating conditions of approval for land developments and subdivisions. I would need to hear a complaint from someone that says, hey, we know that they're not supposed to have an irrigation system, and yet I can see the irrigation system from my house. Can you come out and investigate? At that point, that's where that process would begin. I don't have complete knowledge of everything that is happening in the town at any point in time. We have to be informed of what these things are. Just like the same thing goes for the zoning official or the building official. They have to receive a complaint, or they have to receive a comment from a member of the public so that they can go and investigate.
Hi, Gary Stoner, Punchbowl Trail, Richmond. I'd like to ask a question through the chair to Mr. Cabral, who mentioned that it's in the best interest of the abutters and the developer to cooperate with one another, and I'm curious as to what he means by that.
One of the biggest questions that we all have is there a direct connection between the Fisher feeding any of the test wells and your well, if assuming you're on a butter? And really the only way to confirm that would be if the applicant was able to monitor the level in your well while they're doing a pump test. And then we will know, and you will know, and the applicant will know whether or not there is a direct impact on your property.
So Steve, could you just expand upon what that would entail?
Oh, well, basically, as Bob mentioned, say a transducer is placed in the abutter's well, so that as the pumping occurs on the applicant's property, the level of water, the static level of water in the abutter's well can be monitored. For example, while the applicant is running their test pump, does the abutter's water level in their well drop, or does it remain stable? And that would be helpful for everyone. Otherwise, there is a bit of conjecture as to what the impact will be on the abutters. Because as Bob mentioned, the fractures can go in pretty much any direction. And what we really want to know is whether or not the applicants have drilled into a fissure that the abutters have also drilled into. Because if everyone is pumping from the same fissure, then we would all anticipate there could be negative impacts to everyone involved. Because we're doing a pump test at one well from a given fissure, But in the real world, there could be 2, 3, or more homes pumping from that same fissure, and it would be great for everyone to know that.
So that's a different type of additional information we don't have right now, as opposed to the continuous 7-day monitoring program. That sounded like that was a passive action by the applicant, putting some monitors in the existing wells and seeing what happens to the water while everyone else around uses water and lives their lives, and seeing if the people around the site affect the site. So there's two different things that could give better information.
Exactly.
Bob Sayer, Punch Bowl Trail. I gave I think it was 2 pages that I'm sure that all of you have read. So I'm not going to bore you with going over it piece by piece, but I gave you a little bit of history of since I moved here. I didn't give you the history from before I moved here, but we bought a piece of land in West Greenwich on John Potter Road. We planned on building a house up there. So first thing I did is, before I put money into going into a mortgage and everything else, I'm going to drill a well. So I drilled a well. And we went down 640 feet. And at that time, there wasn't enough water there. So they said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to hydrofrack it and we'll surge it. So they hydrofracked, surged that well. That well tested out, and the old man's terms were your static level is at 40 feet. So that means it's relatively groundwater that's feeding that. Anything below 40 feet wasn't coming in. So I have a question on the two. Well, first of all, we're only talking about 2 wells that are within 30 feet apart. Those 2 wells being tested, we don't know what the other 3 wells are going to be, and that's if they're going to use both of those wells. I assume they're going to use both of those wells, one for one piece of property and one for another piece of property. Through the data that I read through and everything else, the overall pumping was pretty steady until 5 hours, 5.5 hours, and then it hit like 69 feet, 70 feet. And then there was a severe drop in one of those wells. I want to know if there was a severe drop in that other well after that happened, because just me being me, I look at it as both of those wells were drawing from the fractures because both of those wells were hydrofracked right from the beginning. The initial person that drilled those wells, they hydrofracked both of them, because one of them, it was the previous attorney said that there was only like a quarter minute that was coming back or whatever. I don't know whether that's factual or not, but that's what he said in the meeting. You can look up the minutes. So what I looked at it as, just looking at it logically, I'm figuring that both of those wells were pumping out of that fracture. And then when they hit that 69 feet, whatever, one of them went down. That's around 70 gallons of water that went down in 32 minutes. So it's roughly 2 gallons a minute that one dropped. Was there any testing on the other one to show if that one went down? Because now that makes a big difference. That means that the fissures that are feeding that other well were enough to feed that other well, and this one was sharing it. But all of a sudden, when it got down to that point, now the one that was sharing it, wasn't getting anything. That's one of the questions I have. My other question is, I've lived up there for 30 years. I've hiked every square inch of the woods around there and everything else. And that place where they are putting that housing development and where they're going to have the leach fields out in the back, another concern, very big concern, is the drainage from all of that property. They're going to be running it down into what I call the basin. At the bottom, there's a stone wall in between their property and the Reynolds property, and it's a basin. I took pictures after a 2-day moderate rainstorm. I took pictures of water that was standing, and actually you could see ripples with it running.
So that means that water is standing there and everything else. And this is where they're proposing their drainage fields and everything else, which is gonna include anything that they wash their cars with, anything that antifreeze leaks, anything else. So the pollution that's going to be going into that aquifer area in the basin there is going to be sitting there right within probably 75 feet or less of the Reynolds well, and the next piece of property down, and the bog, which is spring fed. So those are concerns as far as the drainage goes, because I'm telling you, I used to tell people you could during the spring thaw and when a big rain came and everything else, you could go tubing down Punch Bowl Trail. That's how much the water runs down that hill, and it goes right into that bog. So I mean, everything from the road is already going in there. We don't need to add to the pollution. Another thing that I mentioned in my letter that I want to mention on the record is nothing's being said about that other piece of property that they split off. There's another 8+ acres that they split off. Nobody's even talking about that. So knowing developers, I know that they're going to want to develop that. Initially they're going to want to develop that. They're already going to have a lane in there. That means that they could put several more houses in there if this plan approves. The other thing is, can anybody answer how many HOAs are in residential areas that have all been R2 or R3 zoned for years, that all have 200-foot frontage? Is there any other HOAs that are in the town? Does anybody know that? I'd like an answer to that question. The recharge rate from rainfall. I have to agree with Mr. Cabral on this one. I want to thank both of these guys because they're very, very intelligent and well-versed in their careers. But I have to agree with Mr. Cabral that the recharge to that slope is going to be little to nothing, because as soon as it hits that bedrock, it's going down to the bottom, which I call the basin. That's where all the water is going to end up. I've seen it. I've removed stumps up there, dug down 6 feet, and it's bone dry in some areas, up on top of that hill. On top of the hill is a better chance of recharging the aquifer because it's not sloped. The water will stay there and get absorbed. Thank you.
Can either Bob Curry or Steve address some of Bob Thayer's questions regarding what happened to well 1 after well 2 drops? Is there any data?
This is Steve Cabral. I do believe that when they did the pump test of well number 2, that they did monitor the elevation of well number 1. I don't have the data in front of me, but offhand, I may be incorrect, but I believe that the well number 1 did not drop the 50 feet like well number 2 did. But again, I don't have that data in front of me, but we can easily confirm that. We can get that data from the well, or maybe Bob has that handy. And I could easily take a look. If I could get a copy of that 2-page letter, I'll be glad to respond in more detail in regards to the drainage comment and other comments.
Okay, and Bob, you may have some comments.
Yeah, just to, I want to elaborate on what Steve said. I don't happen to have it with the data with me either, but I have a recollection of what I looked at. And I wrote some of that into my review. When well number 2 did suffer that sudden decline near the end of the pumping duration, there was a slight reaction of well 1, but then it didn't drop similarly, which is why my interpretation of that was that there's no question there's hydraulic connectivity between those two. I'll call them exploratory wells. And I think it's a fracture at about 60 to 70 feet down is where the connectivity is. Okay, and then so just to be clear about that. Okay, and again, I'd expect, but 2 wells 25, 30 feet, whatever it is apart, I'd expect to find in bedrock wells connectivity if they have any decent amount of fracturing. couple other things. Hydrofracking is very commonly used to develop wells, not unusual. And the gentleman spoke a few minutes ago, no, he's absolutely correct. It's not unusual to drill a well, get minimal capacity, minimal yield on the air blow test, say, and then you hydrofrac the well, and now you have one that's at least viable for, say, residential use. So that's not unusual. Actually, it's more common than people realize.
And then thank you, Bob. The other comment was about the concern on the drainage and the basin, and how the applicant was addressing that. I believe in the documents provided, there was some drainage for that area. I'm not sure if you can address that at all based on the review of the documents.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear if there was a question for me.
There was a question about concern for drainage at the base or at the low point of the property, adjacent to the Reynolds property, and concern of overflow at another property.
Yes, I could easily take a look at the plans, but typically if the land is undeveloped and it's wooded, you have a lot of leaf litter and you have an organic layer on the surface, which doesn't allow water to infiltrate readily. And so it is common that an undeveloped woodland is going to collect more water than if you have a DEM conforming infiltration pond built. For example, I believe the seasonal high water table throughout the site was in the vicinity of 3 feet, if not a little bit more in some areas. And so in order for the applicant to get a DEM permit for the drainage, they have to demonstrate that the bottom of the infiltration basin is 3 to 4 feet above the seasonal high water table. And they have to remove any subsoil or organic matter that has an infiltration rate less than, I believe it's 2.4 inches per hour. Now, what I can do, before the next meeting, I'll gladly take a quick look at the drainage design so that I can give you a more detailed response.
Right. I believe it was a design system with specific filtration involved.
Yes. Yeah.
Recollecting.
So
now
that,
in front of me.
yeah, so that'll only take me a few minutes to take a look at their design. I believe another engineer in our office did review it maybe a few months ago.
Okay.
But he's not with me at the moment, but I will give you a definitive answer. And in regards to separation from other wells and buildings and roads, DEM has specific guidelines or requirements that dictate that an infiltration system has to be offset by X feet from different features. And DEM also requires that there be a degree of pretreatment so that any solids, oils, greases have an opportunity to be removed prior to the runoff getting to the infiltration ponds. So I will take a detailed look at that and give you a definite answer.
And I believe there's a question about the balance of the property, the 8+ acres, and potential development.
I don't think that it's even appropriate for the planning board to discuss a different piece of property that is not the subject of the application.
Because this is, the property was split.
Yes.
I'm remembering now that I'm saying it out loud that
Yes.
it is 2 separate lots.
Yes.
There was a question about HOAs, number of HOAs in town. I'm not sure if that's something that information on, or would the town?
I could certainly endeavor to find that information, but it may become the subject of a very costly opera request. But I cannot know off the top of my head how many exist. That would require a lot of digging.
Sure.
My guess would be numerous because we've had conservation developments and cluster subdivisions for decades or so. And usually as part of those developments or family residential compounds, there are those those type of agreements required, so
Virtually anything with a private road.
you wanna be careful what you get into in that kind of research. I can just assure there are numerous others in the community, and there may be some that don't even have gone through the planning board review process, like my neighborhood, once upon a time. Was never approved through the planning board process. It was pre-existing by a plat filed in the sixties, but there was a homeowners association when I moved in. We don't have one anymore. So, you know, the universe is quite diverse for that type of research.
Can we ask, just to say, what are you looking for on these HOAs? What's your purpose for asking that question?
I just don't believe that, HOAs belong in residential neighborhoods. I don't blame, but you know, with our neighborhood, for instance, I can't speak for the rest, how they're developed or anything else. But our neighborhood was always 200-foot frontage, 2 acres or more. Everybody enjoyed that. And if this developer came in and didn't split the lot in half and put 3 house lots there with 6 acres apiece, we wouldn't be having these conversations. And, I mean, it's not a big deal, and I don't want to waste your time, Talia. It's not a big deal. I just don't think HOAs don't belong in Richmond, if you ask me. And if you want my true opinion, neither do cluster developments and conservation designs, because I had the well problem in West Greenwich. We sold that property and told the people, because I had 1/3 of a gallon a minute return on the water, and they said I was able to build on that. I said, I'm not putting a house on here with 1/3 of a gallon a minute. So then I moved down here, and then we have that conservation design called Oak Hill in the back. That screwed up everybody's wells again. Now we got one on our street. I mean, it's getting closer and closer to home, and it's the same problem over and over again. Thank you.
Chris, can you address HOAs and who has the authority to restrict them or not?
Landowners can form an HOA on their own if they wish. The reason it's my understanding in this situation, is there's open space land that has to be cared for. And I believe each of the potential owners of 5 lots would own an undivided 1/5 interest in the common areas, take care of the association. Collects those fees to manage that open space. And if there's as Kelly said, a private road, who's going to maintain the private road, who's going to plow the private road, the homeowners association. So it comes in this situation. But private landowners, if they wanted to, they could. They're going to prevent it.
Okay. Is there any other public comment?
Marjorie Murphy, Punchbowl Trail. I had a question. In the ordinance, aren't the drills supposed to be drilled aren't the wells supposed to be drilled 200 feet apart, not 28 to 30, or maybe 100? I can't remember from the ordinance, but I know it wasn't as little as what they did.
Good question.
Not sure. You want to know how these are actually going to be drilled, and when, not just for testing, but when everybody's going to go about their business.
Steve is still here. I've just made it so that the screen does not duplicate, because if I make any spelling mistakes when I type.
Typing under pressure. It's always so.
And I really just typed in richmondri.com, even though we've changed over to .gov, so. So I think that what the section that you're referring to is in relation to the well field test. So that it reads, if this is 1821-100A, if the proposed development anticipates groundwater use of 4,600 gallons a day or greater, or falls closer than 200 feet to each other, if industrial development is proposed or if the planning board finds, based on the peer review of preliminary hydrogeologic evaluation of proposed development, could have a significant impact on the quality and quantity of groundwater property or adjacent properties, the applicant shall carry out a well field test. Is that the section that you're referring to?
I'm not sure, but that is pertinent. I'm also questioning, because I know with the Oak Hill, they had a certain amount of lots proposed and they had to dial back because the wells weren't going to be within the right distance once people moved there. There's that. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, I know pretty much it seems like all we can go by is historical data, and then we crunch the numbers. But I think you have to take into consideration that I'm sure that was a great test done 30 years ago, or report done, but climate has changed significantly since then. We're getting a lot of droughts and more significant droughts. So we have to take that into consideration. To everyone's point being made, it goes to the fact that there's a difference between a few houses being maintained as opposed to 5 4-bedroom. If these questions, for example, monitoring, etc., can't be answered, then obviously it's not sustainable, no matter what kind of development you call it. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
If there's anyone online who'd like to comment, please press *9 to recognize that you would like to be heard.
So, thoughts from the board?
So we get more data. The applicant is.
Oh, one more.
Sure. Question, I'm sure. Marcia House, 45 Punchbowl Trail. I was just wondering if you were going to require that second well test being done that was talked about the last one. And
Okay,
you can talk about that.
thank you. All right, it sounds like we need
More data.
more data and that data. Are we aware that it's available or it hasn't been received by Crossman?
Has not been received by, so the responses from A&J Wells did not make their way to Crossman. The table did not make their way to Crossman. So that initial response was not received by them. They have not been able to opine on it. We have heard some of Mr. Crawl's comments in relation to what Mr. Ferrari's report said. I don't know if you want something more formalized than that. I also, there seems to be 2 different kinds of testing protocols that could be pursued. One would involve putting some wells in butters. One would be basically testing to see if the butters wells are impacting the wells that there on the subject property. I don't know if the board has a preference for one or the other, or if both of them can be completed. I don't know if they can be done. I don't think that they can be done at the same time, but I don't know. This would be a question for either Mr. Ferrari or Mr. Cabral on what, if there should be a sequence on these tests, if there's one that would be more, would provide more data than the other. I don't know. So these are questions that you want to pose to this part.
So we're running into the end of the extension currently. So at the very least, we have to make a motion. Extend, if the applicant is in agreement, with extending this again.
Yes,
Okay, to allow for these additional testing and
that is correct.
I don't know when. The timing of that. On these tests and setting them up.
So I will, I disclose that I am on vacation the week of, the second week of October. So if for anything to go into your packet for the 14th, I would get by like the 2nd of October, which is really not a lot of time. So I think that it could be continued to the second meeting in October, which is the
24th.
28th.
the 28th.
Determining whether we want one or two and which type of tests also determines how long it would take to get information back. If we still feel they should do the repumping to test number 2, if they need to do that, while they do that, put a transponder in a volunteer's abutting well. Get that captured 2 types of data at the same time, and then do the passive testing with transponders in the wells on site, just to see if the surrounding wells are abutting that site. But again, I don't do that kind of testing. I don't know the amount of time they need for that. But it seems like to me that's what's needed. Unless Steve or Mr. Ferrari say I've interpreted it incorrectly.
So Chris has a thought.
Maybe
Where we could.
Yeah, Madam Chair, the first test that Mr. Ferrari recommended, the hydraulic connectivity test, and the transducers. That, the applicant, it sounds like will agree to that. The other test, though, that Mr. Ferrari mentioned, well, that is something, you hit on it, it's gotta be volunteer. You can't, or they can't, or you would have to absolutely volunteer. Do that. Absolutely not. Well,
Sure.
So
Yeah, I
as,
can.
as a board, we wouldn't be able to recommend that or request that specific test because it requires volunteers.
Could require it.
I don't think you can require.
Okay.
If someone or all want to volunteer.
Can't list it as.
And
a-
that raises-
Right, okay.
Let's not. The applicant determines, manages their application. So they may not want it. They may not want it, but
They may not want to go to people's houses and.
And it raises the question, how far do you go from the subject problem? You know, there's so many complexities.
But we can require the passive monitors in the
Correct.
existing 2 wells on the site for a 7-day period as recommended.
And
That's the other test.
I think based upon the testimony that we've received from our experts, I think that is something that you could feasibly request.
you can request it. Because again, they manage their applications. We're say right now, you've got enough maintenance. No, we're not giving you anything else. We're not trying to manage your case, your application. Just want to make that clear.
okay.
No, I understand that, but from what I'm hearing from the board and everybody else, more information is better. And the quickest way for an application to get denied is for a developer to say, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, okay, bye. Yes, the transducers in our wells, we will do it.
As well as, there was 3 other items that seem to be waiting on. A&J well, August 25th, August,
So I have a copy of that. I can give that
Okay.
to Rossman Engineering.
and the updated table number 2.
That's part of the response. It was the second page on the response, so I can also give that to Rossman.
And, so, developer pumping memo. 3rd item that you.
We're still waiting on the radon testing too.
And the radon test.
Radon is very important in our geographical region.
Oh, so this was just Mr. Ferrari's memo.
Oh.
That's just what it was titled as.
There was a question about testing well two, separate from adding these transducers. Was that, is the applicant open to doing that? Does that make sense?
If I'm reading Mr. Ferrari's report correctly, there's really no need for it. When the only information was from Mr. Cabral, it certainly looked like it did, but when we looked at Mr. Ferrari's report, it doesn't look like it's needed. Now, maybe I'm misreading Mr. Ferrari's report, that I don't.
Okay.
Oh, if I may, this is Steve Cabral. I believe Bob may have received more information from AJ Well than we had received. So once we receive the response to our initial comments, then we may or may not agree that well two should be tested for a longer duration again. It's just that, as Talia mentioned, we never did receive a response from the first memo.
Okay, so a little time to review that first before we can
Yeah.
address.
We're waiting for our peer response.
Correct.
So we need a motion at least for the extension.
Right.
And for the decision. And I guess that's it, right? You can't add other stuff at this stage. The transducers on site.
We have to offer the applicant to do the on-site transducers. That's in the record of our public hearing.
And through council, they've agreed to do that.
Yeah.
So we'll see what, if they in fact do that, let's give it to Mr. Cabral.
So,
Do we need two different?
I don't think so. I think
Just one?
motion to.
So the motion to continue would be to the 28th.
Yep.
If the applicant agrees. And then the decision, so there's only one meeting in November. It is not on the Tuesday, it is on the Wednesday because the Tuesday is a holiday. So it would be a decision for November 12th. Of course, if the applicant agrees.
The applicant, okay?
Oh, absolutely.
Very good.
alright, so I'll make a motion regarding, and the public hearing will still open. correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Once you open it, it's open until you close.
Okay. I'll make a motion regarding the Perry Hill Conservation Subdivision Punchbowl Development Corporation. Providence, 904, 4-6 lot minor subdivision, private right of way, located at 0 Punchbowl Trail, lot 5E, lot 5.15, lots will support single family. One of the proposed lots will be set aside as open space for the proposed at the extension at the request of the applicant will extend it until the 28th board meeting.
For the public hearing.
For the public hearing. And the decision extended to November 12th meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay. Moving on to the business workshop, Article 2.
I think maybe if you want to just take like a very brief break, just as people leave, when fair amount of sound coming, going.
Yeah, I think you
Just might make it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go to the bathroom.
This is.
It's right on the way, it's right close to the,
But he's on what?
it's connected to
When
the
the bus
internet.
driver got up.
So we'll restart the meeting or continue the meeting at new business, workshop Article 2. Richmond Land Development and Subdivision Regulation. So where are we? I think in the audience, Bob and all, if you wouldn't mind just keeping your voices down because we're continuing the meeting. Thank you.
Please feel free to talk on the
Feel
phone,
free to talk, but
just because it picks up all of the sounds from everywhere. LinkedIn is getting to the.
okay, finding the,
These are all those things she sent us.
No, I know, but yeah, go to town's webpage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go to Rich. Yeah, go to Rich. Yeah, just get hit.
I print the email and then I check off, when I download the attachments, I do it as a one thing, but I look at the folder and I check off that what is, you said was in there, is in there.
I know, I send a lot of stuff.
no, it's good because then you can kind of look individually, but when you go to the website, you know, you can see it now. It's
Yeah, you see it
point
all.
I can just put.
And this is the stuff that makes my head.
Right there. No, no. No, this box. Drag this over. You know. That box. There we go.
Success.
Great success.
Okay,
Excellent.
we're ready.
All right.
Motion adjourned?
Yeah.
You may wanna say that after you look what's on the page.
So once again, back to amendments to our land development and subdivision regulations. So the legislative basis for Article 2 comes from Rhode Island General Law 45-2332, 45-2431, and to a lesser, those still in forceful extent, 45-22.24. So all of these sections have been included in your packet. That's why it looks so long. So per Rhode Island General Law 45-2332, where words or phrases used in this chapter are defined in the definition section of either the Rhode Island Comprehensive Planning and Land Use Regulation Acts or the Rhode Island Zoning Enabling Act of 1991, they have the meanings stated in those acts. Additional words and phrases may be defined in local ordinances, regulations, and rules under this act in a manner that does not conflict or alter the terms and mandates of this act, the Rhode Island Comprehensive Planning and Land Use Regulation Act, and the Rhode Island Zoning Enabling Act of 1991. The words and phrases defined in this section, however, shall be controlling in all local ordinances, regulations, and rules created under this chapter. This is also echoed in Rhode Island General Law 45-2431, where words or terms used in this chapter are defined in 45-22.2- or 45-2332. They have the meanings stated in that section. In addition, the following words have the following meanings. Additional words and phrases may be used in developing local ordinances under this chapter. However, the words and phrases defined in this section are controlling in all local ordinances created under this chapter. As the words and phrases contained in Rhode Island General Law 45-2332 and Rhode Island General Law 45-2431 are controlling in all of the ordinances, the definitions contained in Article 2 must match the definitions found in enabling legislation. There are instances where words or phrases that have been defined in Article 2 do not have their basis in the enabling legislation. This is true for conservation development, conventional subdivision, cul-de-sac, development overlay plan, easement, endorsement, existing conditions and resources planning, farm lot, hammerhead, land disturbing activity, land unsuitable for development, non-buildable lot, prime agricultural soils, prime farmland, and farmland of statewide importance, residential development, re-subdivision, right-of-way, site context map, street right-of-way, viewshed, and yield plan. Other words and phrases are defined in other legislation. This is true for floodplain or flood hazard area and reservoir area / core area, gross. There are also many words or phrases contained in Rhode Island General Law 45-2332 and Rhode Island General Law 45-2431 that are not defined in our regulations. The board may be inclined to include some of them in the future. Additionally, minor and major subdivision will have new definitions soon as the result of legislative activity, which were amendments to Rhode Island General Law 45-2432. They are minor subdivision. So a minor subdivision will soon be subdivision creating 9 or fewer buildable lots, and a subdivision creating 10 or more buildable lots on an existing improved public street. The process by which a municipal planning board, commission, technical review committee, and or administrative officer reviews a minor subdivision is set forth in 45-2338. Minor subdivisions shall include oversized lot subdivisions. And then it's unusual because the way that it's actually written, it goes right from there into then saying oversized lot subdivision of an existing lot. I don't know if that was an error that was made, but that's, if you're looking at this and wondering why is this flowing in this way, that's because that's what the state law says.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it creates this new creature.
Yes, it does. Subdivision of an existing lot, which results in the creation of a vacant lot or lots of residential use, and which resulting vacant residential lots are equal to or greater in lot area than the lot area of at least 50% of the developed residential lots within 200 feet of the lot proposed for subdivision, as confirmed by a professional land surveyor based on a compilation plan. Such a term is defined by the rules and regulations for professional surveying, and which resulting residential lots have access to available sewer and water, or have demonstrated the ability to drill a private well meeting state standards if no public water is available, and or the suitability and setbacks required for an on-site wastewater treatment system where no public sewer is available, and the resulting lots are not less than 3,000 square feet in lot size for each. A lot qualifying for this type of subdivision shall be reviewed under the requirements and procedures set forth in 45-2338, but shall not require zoning relief solely based on the resulting reduced lot area of the newly created lots. The resulting subdivided lots shall have the benefit of reduced requirements as set forth in 45-2438, and or are eligible for the processes set forth in 45-2446 as applicable. And the new definition for major subdivision is subdivision creating 10 or more buildable lots where a street extension or creation is required. The process by which municipal planning board or commission reviews any subdivision qualifying for this review under 45-2339. So ultimately, the board's task is as follows. While most of the definitions included in Article 2 must be based upon the underlying state laws that inform how we actually define these phrases, the board does have some latitude to develop new definitions for words or phrases that remain undefined in the overarching enabling legislation. So what I did was I went through all of our definitions in Article 2, and I identified where they came from specifically, how they should be amended. And there are some that I did not touch because they can remain as they are. There are very few and far between. Example of one is environmental constraints. That one is pretty much, it is identical to what is stated in state law. So, as previously mentioned, there are some phrases that are not defined. If you like those existing definitions, that's fine. We don't necessarily have to change them. If you do not like them, we can workshop additional language to replace what we have currently. But I don't know if, I also don't know if there are any words or phrases that the board would like to add to our regulations that do already exist in state law. So there are a couple of different things that the board can think about. Again, most of these changes are things that the board really can't get away from, because in the event where we have an inconsistency between what our regulations define something as and what the state says, as I mentioned probably 3 times from just reading my own memo aloud, they control. So even if we have a regulation or if we have a definition that says, this is what a minor subdivision is, if it does not comport with what state law says, we can't make decisions based upon definitions that are inaccurate or are incorrect. So I don't know how long the board wants to go into this discussion in relation to these, or if there are specific words or phrases that you would like me to consider revising the definitions for. This is not going to be the only time that you look at Article 2, or as we continue with this process with any of the articles. But this was another one that I could go through and amend pretty quickly, kind of like Article 10. So, or has any questions or comments, concerns, or definitions that you like, definitions that you don't like, I'm very happy to hear them.
I read through the whole thing. A lot of it's mandatory, some of the things that you commented on, you explained your rationale. I really didn't see anything that I need to modify.
This will be the 3rd time I will have done this. With 3 different sets of legal counsel. The last go around tried to keep the definitions strictly to what the enabling required. And then if we had other words like the enabling didn't have, like conservation development, relied on the solicitor's development of simple and plain language for that. And what I see in my work, when I read Superior Supreme Court cases, the comments that come down from the judges sitting are keep it simple, keep it a standardized interpretation. Everyday words should mean everyday things. I didn't see anything in there. There's nothing hanging out there in my world that, oh, this definition needs to be in there. Or, gosh, I hate that one. So I'm pretty content with you continuing, like you did with the zoning uses, tackling that.
Okay.
I'm good with the proposed revision. Keeping it simple.
And of course, if, any of you wake up in the middle of the night and go, I need to change the definition of what a farm lot is, please, let me know and I'll put something together.
That one had a lot of go around on it. Last, I think you're talking Solicitor Ellsworth and Planner Stetson.
So, if that does happen, or any of the other phrases that are not defined, please let me know. But otherwise, I can consider some. I mean, I can read through the ones that we don't have to abide directly by state law for, and read them aloud to myself, see if they seem kind of weird in any way, shape, or form. From doing this exercise, I didn't really reflect any of them being like, that doesn't make any sense at all. But
Okay. All right, is there anything we need to do other than?
Nope.
Okay.
no, I just more I wanted to be able to get any feedback if there was any, see if there were any things that wanted to get input. Totally fine. This is just a workshop, so it's not going to be specifically voting on anything. Just be more of a, we encourage the planner to look at different words and phrases.
Yeah.
But If
Yeah.
not, that's fine.
If you find ones that are defined but aren't used in the regulations, my suggestion would be,
Delete it.
yeah, that's what we tried to do last time.
If it's unnecessary, you know that there may be something unique, not necessary.
Because there's still holdovers from old regulations and many amendments over many times in the past decades.
All right. Second to the last item, anyone else?
I will sit, so because I'm going on vacation, I will be posting the agenda early.
Okay.
There will, I like how this whole meeting worked out because I was very apprehensive that I was going to have to try and collect all of this technical data in a very truncated time frame. And now we have more time because the studies were conducted for us to get that data. So I think that at the next meeting, it would be more review of all the language that I advised.
Okay.
So, and I might try my hand at more complicated ones because you'll all have a fair amount of time in which to look at them. Okay.
So, motion to adjourn?
Yeah, so if Dan wants to make the motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye. Actually, adjournment can be by consensus, you don't need a motion.
No, okay.
Is that right? All right.
Yeah.